the likely drivers really that are going to be looking at. Liquidity, Bell, has been a persistent issue. Is that expected to pick up?
That one's very hard to tell, but yes. But you can say that certainly a lack of liquidity in the space, which is really just down to the lack of investment interest that we've seen, and down to a lot of different factors that we can get through. Of course, you've got the macro one with the amount of rate rises still feeding through, and then also just the lack of regulatory clarity in the space. But yeah, certainly that lack of liquidity is a reason, if you take a look at Bitcoin on a year-to-date basis, that you've just continued to see prices trading in a very tight range, really between, say, 26 to 28,000 for the most part.
It's been there for a while as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, since March of this year, which was that tick high, was down to the regional banking crisis. But yeah, certainly one of the key indicators we're watching, really what could help change the dial perhaps, is down to regulatory clarity, which is something to note as well, because even though we have seen progress, it's interesting when you think about jurisdictions here in Hong Kong, Singapore, Middle East, Japan, Europe, all of these regulators are starting to push ahead in some way, but it's the US that's really holding out or waiting still if we get something there.
Bearish, not least if you look at Bitcoin, for instance. I mean, you've got Death Cross forming a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago.
Right,
so that's one of the indicators. But, you know, what is the mood, if you will?
I think it still does really just depend on what happens in terms of the regulatory clarity, because the big one for Bitcoin, you used to speak about the Death Cross, so the 50-day moving average moved below the 200-day moving average, and so that told us that the outlook is not looking great. What could really spark some sort of sustained interest again would be whether we saw some sort of approval from Gary Gensler, you can see here, but a Spotcoin bit filing, or ETF essentially, so it would be allowing investors to go directly into a place like BlackRock, for instance, and make a bet on the direction of Bitcoin prices. But the SEC has so far really just held back from making any sort of decision. They've continued to delay or defer them months ahead. So we were sort of hoping or expecting something in the fourth quarter, but just given the action last week from the SEC making another delay once again on a filing, it tells us perhaps we're not going to see it over the coming 3 months.